I wasn't looking for another woman. I was looking for an escape hatch from my own life, a quiet corner where the echoes of my last relationship, the shattering glass, the even more shattering silence that followed, could finally fade into a dull, manageable hum. My new job at Vance and Associates was supposed to be that corner. It was aggressively beige, relentlessly corporate, and blessedly anonymous. I could be a ghost in a cubicle, processing data, until my own data was overwritten, my own history rendered irrelevant by spreadsheets and quarterly reports. For 3 months, it worked. I was numb, efficient, and utterly alone. And then the dam broke. It happened on a Tuesday, in the subterranean chill of the P2 parking level. A single, innocuous email from my sister, another well-meaning, but painfully misguided attempt to set me up with her husband's charming, single colleague, was the final, tiny crack. I felt the pressure build behind my eyes, a hot, stinging swell that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the hollowed-out space where my life used to be. I made it to my car, a decade-old sedan that was as tired as I was, before the first sob escaped. I folded myself over the steering wheel, the cheap plastic cool against my forehead, and let the grief I'd been swallowing for months pour out of me in ragged, ugly gasps. The sound of footsteps on concrete, slow and deliberate, didn't register at first. Then, a soft tap on the driver's side window. I flinched, scrubbing at my face with the back of my hand, my whole body rigid with humiliation. Through the blurry glass, I saw the silhouette of a woman. She wasn't wearing a corporate suit, but a dark green jacket and practical boots. I cracked the window an inch, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. "Are you all right?" Her voice was low and calm, like stone smoothed by a river. It held no pity, only a quiet, steady concern that was somehow worse. "I'm fine," I rasped, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just a long day." She didn't move. I could see her more clearly now. She had dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, pulled back in a loose braid. Her face was all gentle angles and intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through my flimsy excuses. "It sounds like more than a long day," she said, her voice unwavering. "My name is Alara. I was just picking up some papers from Robert Vance. My boss." My stomach twisted. Of all the people to witness my complete unraveling, it had to be someone connected to the one place I was trying to hold it together. I took a shaky breath, ready to tell her to leave me alone, but the words wouldn't come. She simply waited, her patience a tangible thing in the quiet garage. "My car won't start," I finally mumbled, turning the key in the ignition to produce a pathetic, sputtering click. It was a new lie, but it felt more dignified than the truth. Alara's gaze flickered from my face to the dashboard and back again. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips, but it wasn't unkind. "That can be the final straw, can't it?" she said, as if a dead battery was a perfectly reasonable explanation for a full-scale emotional collapse. "Where do you live?" "I can give you a ride." Pride, that old, useless friend, reared its head. "No, thank you. I can call a service. Or a cab." I didn't want her help. I didn't want anyone's help. Help was a transaction, an opening for expectation and disappointment. I'd had enough of that with Amelia, enough for a lifetime. "It's starting to rain," Alara noted, her voice still impossibly gentle. As if on cue, I heard the first fat drops begin to spatter against the concrete ceiling of the garage entrance. "And calling a cab from here at this hour will take an age. Come on. My truck is just over there." She gestured with her chin towards an older model dark blue pickup, clean but clearly a working vehicle. There were bags of what looked like potting soil in the bed. She was nothing like the sleek, sharp-edged women who worked in my building, or the polished, brittle woman my boss was currently married to. She was grounded. Her presence felt like solid earth beneath my feet, and I was so tired of floating. "I live out past Oakhaven," I said, my voice small. It was a test. It was a 20-minute drive in the opposite direction of the city's affluent northern suburbs, where I assumed she and Mr. Vance had once lived. "Perfect," she said, without a flicker of hesitation. "I'm headed that way to check on a client's irrigation system." It's no trouble at all. The ease with which she dismantled my objections left me speechless. Defeated, I gathered my purse and my laptop bag, the weight of my life feeling impossibly heavy, and followed her to the truck. The cab smelled of damp earth, fresh cedar, and something faintly floral, like lavender. It was the antithesis of my sterile office, and as I sank into the worn passenger seat, a tiny, traitorous part of me began to relax. The first few drives were exercises in polite, excruciating silence. I offered stilted, one-word answers to her gentle questions, keeping my eyes fixed on the passenger side window. I was mortified by our first meeting, by her connection to my boss, and most of all, by the quiet competence with which she had taken charge of my situation. My car, it turned out, needed a new alternator, a repair that would take the better part of a week. When I'd called her to say I would just take the bus, she'd simply said, "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. I'm driving past your exit anyway. I'll pick you up at 7." And she had learned my name from the employee directory, a fact that felt both invasive and oddly touching. So I became her passenger. And in my silence, I became an observer. I learned the topography of her hands first. They were capable, with clean, short nails and a network of fine lines and calluses across the palms that spoke of real work, of digging in the dirt and coaxing things to grow. She would rest one hand lightly on the gear shift, her fingers tapping out a silent rhythm against the worn leather. I learned the sound of her breathing, a slow, even cadence that never seemed to stutter. I learned the way she smiled, not with her whole mouth, but with a slight upward tilt at one corner, usually in response to something on the radio, or the antics of a frantic squirrel on the side of the road. Her truck was a mobile sanctuary of her personality. A thermos of what smelled like strong black tea sat in the center console. A pair of muddy gardening gloves was tucked into the door pocket. A single, perfectly preserved oak leaf rested on the dashboard. I found myself cataloging these details, hoarding them like treasures. They were clues to the woman beside me, a woman who had seen me at my absolute worst, and had offered nothing but uncomplicated kindness. I didn't understand it. And because I didn't understand it, I didn't trust it. Amelia's kindness had always come with strings, with unspoken expectations that I was constantly, exhaustingly failing to meet. I waited for Alara's other shoe to drop, for the bill to come due. But it never did. On the third day, the sky opened up. A torrential, late autumn storm blew in, turning the evening commute into a crawl. Rain hammered against the roof of the truck, a relentless drumming that blurred the world outside into a wash of gray and shimmering headlights. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers became the soundtrack to our slow journey. The storm seemed to create a pocket of intimacy inside the cab, a small, warm world sealed off from the chaos outside. Bad memories? Alara's voice was soft, barely audible over the storm. I startled, realizing I'd been staring sightlessly out the window, my jaw clenched. What? You get a certain look on your face when you think no one's watching, she said, her eyes staying on the road. Like you're bracing for something. Her observation was so accurate it felt like a physical blow. I didn't have a defense against it. The rain, the darkness, her quiet presence, it all worked to erode the careful walls I'd built around myself. Something like that, I admitted, my voice tight. I moved here to get away from them. The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and new. I hadn't said that out loud to anyone. A person or a place, she asked. It wasn't a pushy question. It was an invitation. Both, I guess, I said, the words coming out in a rush before I could stop them. They were intertwined. Her and the city we lived in. I couldn't seem to separate them. Every street corner held a memory, most of them, sharp. I stopped, horrified at how much I had revealed. I was talking about Amelia. I never talked about Amelia. Alara was silent for a long moment, navigating a particularly large puddle that sent a spray of water arcing over the truck. Sometimes a scorched earth policy is the only way to grow something new, she finally said. You have to burn it all down before you can plant again. Her words weren't a platitude. They sounded like a truth she had learned the hard way, a lesson cultivated from her own patch of burnt ground. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than weary gratitude towards her. It felt like kinship. The next evening, the drive was different. The silence was no longer a void but a shared space. As we neared my exit, Alara spoke. You know, Robert and I, we built a life in a house that was all sharp corners. Architecturally beautiful, a nightmare to live in. I was always bumping into things, always feeling bruised. I turned to look at her, surprised by the offering. She had never mentioned her ex-husband, my boss, by name. He loved the idea of it, she continued, her voice reflective, not bitter. The clean lines, the minimalism. He didn't understand that a home needs soft places to land. It took me a long time to realize that I wasn't the clumsy one. The house was just badly designed for a life. She glanced at me, and in the fleeting glow of a passing streetlight, I saw the history in her eyes. Leaving was like walking out of that house and into an open field. Terrifying. But I could finally breathe. She was giving me a piece of her story, a piece that mirrored my own. Amelia had loved our life, our friends, the perfect, curated image of us as a couple. She hadn't understood that I was suffocating inside of it, bruised by the constant performance. I think I lived in a house like that too, I whispered. Ilara nodded, a small, slow movement. It takes courage to leave a house like that, she said. And in that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. She wasn't just a kind stranger or my boss's ex-wife. She was a woman who had navigated a similar darkness and found her way into the light. She was a survivor. The seed of trust, dormant and frozen within me, felt a tentative thought. We pulled up to my apartment complex, and for the first time, I didn't bolt from the truck. I lingered. Thank you, Ilara. For the ride. For I trailed off, not knowing how to finish. For everything, it's my pleasure, Clara, she said, and her small, corner-of-the-mouth smile reached her eyes. It made them shine, and it made my breath catch in my throat. On Thursday, my mechanic called. The part was delayed. It would be Monday at the earliest. When I told Ilara, a strange mix of dread and relief washed over me. I hated being dependent on her. And yet, the thought of these drives ending left a hollow ache in my chest. I have to stop by the nursery on the way home, she said that evening, her tone casual. Do you mind? Of course not, I said, perhaps a little too quickly. The nursery was called Viridian, a name that suited the lush, green world hidden behind its unassuming fence. She led me past rows of saplings and hardy shrubs into a large greenhouse. The air inside was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine. It was a world away from the concrete and steel of my daily life. It was her world. This is it, she said, her voice softer and here, more at home. She ran a hand over the broad leaf of a fiddle leaf fig, a gesture of familiar affection. This is where I started over. She led me to a back corner, to a potting bench cluttered with tools and terracotta pots. On it sat a small orchid, its leaves a bit yellowed, its flowers stubbornly refusing to bloom. This one was a rescue, she said, gently touching a limp leaf. Someone brought it in, thought it was a lost cause. But it just needed the right conditions. Different light, more humidity. A little patience, her fingers brushed against a stem, and the gesture was so tender, so full of care, it made my heart ache. She looked up at me, explaining the specific mineral balance in the water she used, and as she spoke, she reached for a small watering can behind me. Her arm brushed mine, her hand grazing my wrist. It was nothing. A fleeting, accidental contact. But a current, hot and sharp, shot up my arm. It was like lightning striking a dry field. My breath hitched. I looked up from her hand to her face. Her words had trailed off. Her eyes, the color of moss after a rain, were fixed on mine. The air in the greenhouse, already thick and heavy, became charged, electric. The sounds of the world outside, the traffic, the distant sirens, faded away to nothing. There was only the scent of jasmine, the warmth of her skin still humming against mine, and the silent, deafening question hanging in the space between us. In that moment, I knew. I knew this feeling wasn't just gratitude. It was something else, something deeper and far more terrifying. It was desire. And seeing the look in her eyes, a reflection of my own startled awareness, I knew she felt it too. The drive on Friday was an exercise in exquisite torture. Every glance, every shift in our seats, every moment the truck slowed at a stoplight felt amplified. The space between us on the bench seat, which had once felt like a polite distance, now felt like a chasm I was desperate to cross. My mind was a chaotic loop, replaying the moment in the greenhouse. The brush of her skin against mine. The look in her eyes. I was consumed by the scent of her truck, the way the late afternoon light caught the silver in her hair, the memory of her calloused fingers, so gentle on the dying orchid. I wanted to feel those hands on me. The thought was so powerful, so raw, it stole the air from my lungs. I was terrified. The last time I had felt this way, it had ended in ruin. Amelia had been a whirlwind, a beautiful, brilliant storm who had swept me up and then left me shattered in the wreckage. I had sworn off storms. Ilara was not a storm. She was the quiet earth, the patient rain, the steady sun. But the feelings she stirred in me were turbulent, a tempest in my blood. When we arrived at my apartment, I fumbled with my bag, desperate to escape the charged confines of the cab. "Thank you," I said, my voice strained. "Have a good weekend." I practically fell out of the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I spent the weekend in a self-imposed exile, cleaning my apartment with a frantic energy, trying to scrub away the memory of her touch, her scent, her eyes. It was useless. She was everywhere. By Sunday night, I was a wreck. The thought of seeing her tomorrow, of sitting beside her in that truck, was both a dream and a nightmare. I was falling for her, and it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, with the wind at my back, urging me to jump. Monday. The final ride. My car was ready. The words echoed in my head with the finality of a death knell. Elara was quiet when she picked me up, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said since the moment in the greenhouse. We drove towards the city, the silence stretching taut between us. This was it. My chance to retreat, to thank her politely, and walk back into the safety of my beige, colorless life. But I couldn't. The thought of never sitting in this truck again, of never smelling the scent of earth and lavender, of never seeing her quiet smile, was unbearable. As she pulled into the parking garage at work, she put the truck in park but didn't turn off the engine. The moment hung there, suspended. "My car is ready," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," she said, her eyes on the windshield. "Clara," she turned to face me, her expression serious, vulnerable. I couldn't let her do it. I couldn't let her be the brave one. Not again. "Don't," I interrupted, the word coming out choked. "Don't say you're sorry. Or that it was a mistake." Her eyebrows drew together in confusion. "A mistake. In the greenhouse. These rides," I clarified, my voice trembling. "They haven't been just rides for me, Elara. You haven't been just a driver. You saved me. In that garage, when I was falling apart. You've been this steady, solid thing in my life when everything else was spinning. And I'm so scared of what I'm feeling because the last time I felt it, it destroyed me." The confession tumbled out, messy and raw, leaving me exposed and breathless. Elara just watched me, her gaze unwavering. She didn't flinch from my brokenness. She didn't try to fix it. She just held it with me, in the quiet of the cab. Then, slowly, she reached across the console, her callous fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Her touch was electric, a spark in the darkness. "I'm not her, Clara," she said, her voice a low murmur. And then she leaned in. Her kiss was not a storm. It was rain on dry earth. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly gentle. It was a question, asking for permission. It was an answer, promising safety. It was everything I had been terrified of, and everything I had been starving for. I kissed her back, my hands coming up to cup her face, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at her nape. I poured all my fear, and all my hope, and all my aching, desperate yearning into it. It was a surrender. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. The space between us was no longer a chasm, but a shared breath. My phone buzzed in my purse, a harsh, intrusive sound. I ignored it. Elara's thumb stroked my cheek, her touch feather-light. "Who was that?" she asked softly. I glanced at the screen. "My sister." "Family," I said, a wave of the old exhaustion washing over me. Probably wanting to know if I've called her husband's friend yet, I hit ignore, with a decisive press of my thumb. "I'll deal with it later." Or never. The phone buzzed again immediately. My sister was persistent. This time, I answered, my voice firm. "Jenna, I can't talk right now, Clara. I was just calling to, I'm fine." I cut her off, my gaze locked with Elara's. "I'm more than fine. But I have to go. I'll call you this week." I ended the call before she could protest, tossing the phone back into my bag. It felt like severing the final tie to the person I used to be, the one who always bent to the will and worry of others. I turned back to Elara. "My car isn't really the problem, is it?" I asked, a faint smile playing on my lips. "No," she agreed, her own smile finally returning, lighting up her entire face. "It's not. But it was a useful excuse, so what's our excuse now?" The question hung in the air, full of possibility. I have an idea, she said, her voice dropping to that low, intimate tone that made my stomach flutter. Leave your car with the mechanic for one more day. Let me drive you home tonight. And in the morning, let me pick you up and we'll get coffee. At a place with a table. Where we can sit across from each other and pretend we're on a proper date. It was a plan. A concrete step. A way of moving from the forced intimacy of our rides into a chosen one. It was an acknowledgement of the new reality we had just created, and a promise to explore it deliberately. I nodded, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face, feeling warmer than any sunshine. I would like that very much, I said. I would like that more than anything. She didn't kiss me again. She just held my gaze for a long moment, a world of unspoken promises passing between us. Then she put the truck in gear and drove me to the entrance of my office building. As I stepped out onto the curb, I felt different. The air was crisp, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the beige facade of my office building didn't seem quite so oppressive. I watched her truck pull away, a quiet hope blooming in my chest, as fragile and as beautiful as a rescued orchid finally deciding it was safe enough to flower. I had been so sure that starting over meant being alone, that safety meant sealing myself off from the possibility of ever being hurt again. But as I walked towards the revolving doors, I realized that true courage wasn't about building higher walls. It was about finding the one person who made you feel safe enough to tear them down. When you've been shattered by love, is the bravest thing you can do to hide your heart away, or to offer its broken pieces to a gentle pair of hands. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.